And I'll switch on captions as well, just in case the sound is a bit iffy. Ooh, for some reason that just shifted screens. Right, okay, well let's make a start. So welcome everyone to our weekly call. Thank you for coming on today, the very last day of March. Thank you for remembering the change of time for some of you, where we were slightly out of sync, certainly with North America on the time difference for sort of 2 or 3 weeks. So we're back to our sort of regular summertime time slot anyway. So hopefully simplify things again. Let me share my screen just for a moment to refresh everyone's memory on our planned agenda. So hopefully my screen is now being shared. Okay, so the plan for the call. In a second, Raffaele Sommese, I think, Raffaele from the University of Twente will talk about DNS abuse and transient domains as planned, and then time permitting, talk about some forthcoming events and future call topics. But before that, we had some news over the weekend, first thing this morning. So Simon Hickson from the sort of UK Department of Science, Innovation and Technology has kindly sort of joined us to talk about Nigel Hickson, who many of you may well know from the ICANN world, internet governance and the Eurodig and a whole host of other things. So Simon, if you're able to, did you want to...
Yeah, I'll say a few words if that's as we discussed earlier. Yeah, both Nigel and I are from the same department, a slight similarity of names, but we're not related. As I used to josh with him from I'm his son, but not really. We were very close in age. But the news is sad. Nigel died last night of cancer. He'd had it for a year or so, had gone into remission, but after a meeting in Seattle a few weeks ago, he deteriorated quite rapidly. We learned at the end of last week that he was on end-of-life care, and sadly that transpired to be a shorter period than we thought, and he died last night. He had a long career around the internet, working for UK government. He was a vice president for Europe for ICANN for a number of years. He worked for the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry, on internet and digital matters. So he started his life working for UK government and then went out into ICANN and CBI, and returned latterly to UK government, again working on internet matters. He was widely known on the ICANN side of the house. For those of you who've sort of been around that for some time, you will have likely come across him and heard his name. But after a career of some 40 years, largely around the internet industry, he is no longer with us. If you'd like to offer condolences, please, and we'll be able to link you up. We're setting something up out of our department, probably by way of an online book of condolences or similar. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. And I have to say, an abiding memory of Nigel, which I've put on the screen because he's always smiling and laughing. Some of you, if you were in Kyoto for the last but one Internet Governance Forum, He joined, I've obscured their identities as best I can, but a couple of people who are also attending there for the first time from part of UK government, I'll be no more specific than that, and Nigel joined them for the inevitable music night, and was an enthusiastic participant in a team karaoke. I use the term enthusiastic advisedly. He had a distinctive voice, would probably be the kindest way I could put it. Unforgettable in all sorts of ways. So that was a good memory. Just I was reminiscing before this call. But anyway, as Simon said, if anyone wants to pass any words on, sort of get in touch with me. If there is an official link or anything, I'll share that after the call with a link to the recording, etc. Right, thank you for that, Simon. That's much appreciated. Right, so after that sad note, I'm going to sort of then go back to the sort of agenda as planned. We're going to talk about DNS abuse and transient domains. It's a topic that come up at the last couple of OARC meetings. Raffaele gave two really interesting presentations. Well, I thought they were incredibly interesting, and he's kindly agreed to come on this call to share those. And as it happens, I was at the Global Anti-Scam Summit last week, and one of the messages that came out of that was the importance of responding quickly when it became apparent that a domain was being abused, for example, for phishing, which is very pertinent, because that was really one of the topics that Raffaele's research sort of dug into. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Raffaele, who will sort of take us through some of that material, and then we'll have time for a discussion at the end of the presentation. So Raffaele, thanks for coming on the call, really much appreciated. Over to you.
Thanks a lot. I'm going to share the screen. Hope this time doesn't crash. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm Raffaele. I'm assistant professor at University of Twente. So Andrew invited me for this call and trying to merge basically a bit of the thoughts of both presentation that I gave at ORC and the previous Stripe meeting on this topic that we investigated of transient domain. But before digging into the technical content, I want first to refresh you a bit the space of what we are talking when we talk of DNS abuse, because there's a couple of definitions of DNS abuse. One is, for example, looking at domain names that get compromised, and that's usually long-lived domain names. For example, domain name of website hosted on specific content management system that get ejected, and then the domain name get compromised by the fact that the hosting was compromised. But the abuse that we mostly look and mostly investigate is the abuse of the creation of newly registered domain names. And the reason why we did that is because many years ago already, there was an article from Paul Hicks that said that basically most of the newly registered domain name and newly registered malicious domain name live a very short life and die young, and basically they do harm and they get immediately caught and deleted at a certain point. So why we want to investigate this? We want to investigate this because in the past there was a way to have an overview of this domain name that were extremely short-lived. That was given by this system implemented by VeriSign that was called the Rapid Zone Updates. Was a system where basically you could subscribe to the live feed of .com domain and get insight on when things on .com domain changes, for example, when name server change, when a new domain name is added, and so on. But a certain point, this service was shut down. Fast forward more than 10 years later, with the expansion of GTLDs, ICANN introduced the centralized zone database. Centralized zone data service, and this service basically covers most of the GTLDs approved by ICANN. that really helped a lot us as security researcher to investigate DNS resilience, DNS infrastructure, and DNS abuse. The problem that we found is that one snapshot a day is not really enough to investigate DNS abuse because of this short-lived domain that I showed you before. So what's the problem of having one snapshot a day? So imagine that you have like two pictures taken on the same location in 2 different days. This was a house in San Diego, and you are using the 2 pictures to describe whatever happened in that specific location for all the period of time that elapses between these 2 days. This is wrong because if you, for example, not have taken a picture that evening, you will not have known that there was like a SpaceX launch that night. So the problem of snapshot is that the snapshot captures just one instance of the time, but the DNS is changing constantly every moment, and that's what we want to get the grasp on. So the alternative is that you can use tool like passive DNS data. The one provider, for example, from Domain Tool is a very good tool called Newly Observed Domain. That's great. However, it's only related to active queries domain. That means that you can only spot domain name that can be involved in abuse only after the abuse happened, because you will see the domain name in the moment that the traffic will start to go towards the domain name. That means that somehow the phishing attempt or the abusive behavior that's related to that domain name is already ongoing. So what we can do beyond this fit? So the thing that we found like a couple of years ago, we wrote this paper. We found that basically, if you take certificate transparency log, we investigated the CCTLD, but the result applies also to GTLDs. If you take CT logs, you can learn more or less on average half of the domain of an entire CCTLD or half of the domain of an entire GTLD from CT logs alone. So you extract all the domain names from the certificate and you try to compare this domain name with the domain name that you find in the zone, and you find that half of them is in there, okay? Because half of the domain on the internet has a certificate, and now CT log, having a certificate implies that you register this certificate in CT logs. Hence, you need to have these domains exposed to everyone else on the internet. The most interesting result of this paper was that we were able to learn most of them in less than a day from registration. That was basically what prompted us to do a different study, where we started to look basically, can we detect newly registered domain names as soon as they get registered or as close as they get registered using certificate transparency log? And we did that, and we found that basically we were able to detect 42% of newly registered domain name before they appeared in the CZDS snapshot. So before this mechanism of ICANN established to provide transparency was able to provide us this transparency. And that boils down to at around 76,000 domain per name, or almost 1 domain per second if you want, because the average of issuance is almost constant. And the most interesting thing was that 1% of these 76K domains, so around 700 domains, 600, 700 domains, never appeared in the next CZDS snapshot. So basically, domain names that somehow were registered because there was a certificate linked to them but never appeared in the CZDS. And we also tried to figure out how quick we were to the registration date, so how fast we were in detecting these newly registered domain name, and we find out that basically we were within 15 minutes we detected like 30% of them, and within 45 minutes 50% of them. So we were really closing the gap into the visibility of this domain name by looking at the certificate transparency log. And then we start to dig up in this problem why we don't see this 1% of domain name never appear in CZDS. And we found out that there were 2 main possible reasons. One is that someone was issuing a certificate for an expired domain. I know that this may sound like a security nightmare, but this is allowed by the the way that CA operates, because they can basically cache the fact that they have validated the ownership of a domain name. It's called a domain validation token, and they can keep this domain validation token in cache for more than a year. So they can keep issuing a certificate for the domain for more than a year if they have this domain validation token in their cache. And the second instead, but was the far most popular, was domain lasting less for than 2 zone snapshot, and we call this basically transient domain. And we use basically the earth update to distinguish between transient domain and these domains of certificate issued with the expired domain, and we found 42K transient domain over 3-month period. These domains were completely invisible to researchers so far. So what's the definition that we gave? That transient domain basically lasts at most for 24 hours, because otherwise you will see this domain appearing in the next snapshot. And we saw that half of them died within the first 6 hours. That was something that basically, if you remember the article news of Dixie at the beginning of these slides, that you will recall basically. And we reached like operators and in particular registrar that were responsible for these domains, and we asked why these domains were so short-lived, and they told us basically that most of these registrations are linked to malicious behavior, and the reason why they were removed was basically abuse, account suspension, or credit card fraud. For example, someone trying to buy domains with a fake credit card or with a stolen credit card. And the interesting thing is that blocklists do not catch these kind of domains. Sometimes not promptly. That means that they catch them like days later, and in some cases even never catch these domains because they are too short-lived to be caught. And we found that basically this is a missed opportunity for registry and registrar to share this security warning with each other, the fact that these domains has been deleted. We also looked at the infrastructure, and we found that basically all of these are hosted on things that are completely legitimate. Most of them are hosted on Cloudflare. We also look, okay, this is what we can learn from city logs, but what really is out there. So we have a good contact with .nl, the registry of the Netherlands, and we asked them, okay, how many domains that have these characteristics? So short-lived domains that are never captured by a snapshot. You see, and they observed 334, and we observed just 99 for .nl. And that basically tell us that we still have like a huge blind spot, even applying this methodology in wild. We also looked to the feed of domain tools, and we found basically that it was sort of complementary. So in absolute number, they detect 5% more, but more or less there was overlap only for 60%. So each methodology was providing like additional but not complete view of the problem of the domain. So one thing that we try to do is that the point of having these transient domain list, it's a sort of success of registrars detecting malicious domain name before they do damage, or maybe after they've done damage, but they have not done such a lot of damage. The problem is that every of them need to relearn the same signals, the same information, the same decision that brings them to take the action of removing a domain from their zone, or from their, if they're a customer, or from a registrar from their customer set. And this is something that they need to do for every time they learn the signal. And spammers and malicious actors have the advantage that they can basically just move between different registrars and between different registry to evade this detection. And all of this is completely invisible to security researcher meanwhile, because the information is not shared. So what we did is that we try to basically put a bit of operation in the research, and we try to create a sort of live list of these malicious domain that we detect. Because the paper focused on, if you read the paper will focus on looking at transient domain in a sort of post-mortem scenario, meaning that we just look when to the domain when the domain has been deleted and months after it has been deleted. However, if you think about if you delete a domain name from a zone, it's not guaranteed that the domain name will stop to do harm, because there is still a recursive resolver out there that will have that domain name in cache. So we were wondering, can we provide this information to, for example, recursive resolver that can leverage this information to block these domain names in a way that this domain name will not make any harm anymore. And we did that. So how we investigated how we can basically detect these domain names as soon as they die. And we basically, the approach that we took is that we measure all the newly registered domain names that we detect. In the moment that we see three annex domain, that means at the moment we see at a certain point that these domain names are being deleted from the zone, we issue an airdrop request. Another airdrop request is issued at the start of the so as far when we see the domain name for the first time. And basically, if we see in the airdrop request that the status is server hold or client hold, we assume that basically the registry or the registrar is hacking to basically keep this domain to get published, and is like a strong likely indication of abuse. We also monitor if the domain name by any chance become like available again, because that may mean that, for example, the registry or the registrar is releasing the domain name and we remove that from the block list. The part is that moving these from research product to a sort of more operational product, I will not say production ready product, because it's definitely not production ready, it's mostly research. Was a bit of a challenge, because the things that you had to do is basically to implement all the things that we have done in terms of research in a live stream pipeline. And you can see here basically all the madness of that pipeline. The most interesting bit for this community is that to do this, we had to build a pipeline that does more than 40,000 DNS queries per second, and these can be avoided, and I will get in a second on how these can be avoided, but this is what we had to do to gain visibility in the DNS ecosystem, because that's a visibility that doesn't exist at the moment. So we got some nice byproduct, of course, by doing all of these. We got, for example, the list of newly registered domain, the list of confirmed newly registered domain, the fully qualified domain name that we observe from certificate, the stream of the certificate, the stream of the domains that we learn from certificate, all these measurement data. And we decide, let's publish all of these as public data. Let's make these available to the community in a way that no one else needs to do this measurement again, and everyone can benefit of this measurement that are already out there. We do it, of course, for non-for-profit, because we are in university, and I left basically the URL both for block list and the data access here. But the point where I want to get is, this is a lot of effort to enable transparency in a system that should be transparent by itself. And my question is that, is there a better way to solve this problem? And the problem is that at the end of the day, DNS is a pull protocol, because you ask a question and you get an answer. But there is way inside the DNS ecosystem to get like more rapid updates. Even in the DNS, for example, I'm thinking of intermediate zone transfer, but you think about even EPP, it's a way to provide this sort of signaling. And if you have like signal for any update in a zone, something like CTLogs does for certificate, you will be able to detect basically these changes. There was a project that was called the DNS Transparency, run by Warren Kumar and a couple of other folks, that really proposed this basically to enable this kind of sharing of signals inside the DNS ecosystem. And this may be extremely helpful for detecting, again, this early removal of domain names, because if you know that the domain name has been removed from the DNS ecosystem, you want to evict that domain name from all the public and private resolver, from the cache of all public and private resolvers, to avoid that basically someone will still leverage the fact that the domain is in cache to perform abuse. You want, for example, to revoke certificate of an expired domain. There is like a huge issue of dangling certificate linked to domain names that have been expired, for which the name has been of the owner of the domain name has been changed and are still out there, still valid. We have a 90-day window, and people are saying, yeah, let's get to a shorter window. But the solution is not just a shorter window. The solution is also of 90-day validity window. I mean, the solution is also try to get signal when a domain has been deleted. And as a researcher, we can build a better machine learning model, for example, for detect future threat. If we have a ground truth of what is a threat, we can identify jacking, and whatever use case you have you need to monitor continuously the DNS. And the question is also, will all of these be enough to mitigate abuse? And the answer is probably definitely not. And we may even need to go beyond the DNS ecosystem. And with beyond the DNS ecosystem, I mean that the information that are contained in DNS zones is not enough to perform like large-scale studies on abuse, because you need to know also where and with which money this abuse was performed. On where, I'm particularly referring to for example, the registrar. There are a lot of shady registrars out there that allow, for example, for bulk registration, even if many security researchers have said that bulk registration is one of the prime cause of abuse, because you can register thousands of domain names at the same time. There is very little legitimate reasons to do that. So having some sort of system like a sort of DNS transparency, where you can expose the fact that many domain names have been registered at the same time on the same registrar, may help to have this kind of research, and may help to try to force this kind of registrar to take action and to stop offering this kind of services. The WHO, of course, I mean, the GDPR at some point made all the information that we had on voice and nowadays on RDAP completely useless, because everything was redacted for privacy. Not that before was really useful, because to be fair, you can always fake your identity. You can always claim that you are a person that you are not. However, that was still an indication of some data that you can correlate to domains with each other. And probably the most important point is that while registrants may still lie about their identity, and if you create some sort of unique, global, and anonymous, because again, we are people that are trying to fight abuse, we don't care about who is perpetrating the abuse, we just care about stopping the abuse. So if you have something that is even anonymous, we don't care about the identity of identifier of the registrant of a domain name, that enables basically independent third-party security researcher, law enforcement to track basically the money flow that goes to the domain name. If I'm able to know that two domain name has been registered with the same payment information, I can correlate to domain each other, and if I find abusive behavior on one domain name, I may track abusive behavior also on the other domain name that is registered with the same money, basically. At the end of the day, this may not solve the problem, but we will make their life harder, because they will need to use fake identities and fake payment details, or stolen payment details to perform abuse. And in general, their life will be harder and ours will be easier. But to do this, you cannot do alone. You cannot be a single registry that takes initiative and do this. You cannot be like a single registrar that take initiative and do this. You need a collaborative approach, and you need a sort of zone of trust where you can talk with people, where you can share information and exchange data with people, and you can have like some sort of mechanism that do not violate privacy of the users. Again, we can use whatever kind of an anonymous identifier you may think of, but at least we can share this kind of insights. And or we can basically keep playing the cat and the mouse game and never solve the problem. So we had already some contact with several registries to implement this sort of zone intraday snapshot and share more information. It's going slowly. We really want to help as academic community to basically provide some sort of requirements for what we need here. The idea, again, is trying to have as much information as we can, even in an anonymized way, but in an anonymized way that basically will help us to correlate activities that goes between two domain names that belongs to the same entity. And yeah, this is not just me, it's also something that was called from a SAC that was basically suggesting like a collaborative approach this was related to name server hijacking problem, but again, this is the same thing. You can, if you want to have fine-grained visibility and changes in zone file and changes in DNS, you want to have a collaborative approach. And I hope that this can spark like a nice discussion now.
Fantastic. Thank you, Raffaele, for that very quick run through of a lot of material. So you summarised that very helpfully. I'll read through some of the questions in the chat, and then if anyone else wants to ask anything else, by all means, also put it in the chat, or perhaps even easier, raise your virtual hand and you can unmute and talk. But to give you a bit of thinking time, let's just go through these in the order that they're in. I think some of these you addressed in your presentation, Raffaele, but just for completeness. First question from Vicky. I wonder if some of these domains were quickly removed because of some sort of data entry error. But I think you...
Right. I posted that question before he got really going,
Yes.
so I withdraw the question.
Now, to give a bit more of, we are confident because we did RDAP measurement at the registration of the domain name and at the end of when the domain name basically was removed. So we saw the transition between active and server hold. So we have some sort of confidence that it was indeed like a normal registration, let's call it.
Right. I was asking that at the very beginning. I was just thinking, there might be provisioning programs that had a template that, made extra records or whatever. But yeah, it was me asking questions before you gave your talk. It was a mistake.
No worry.
No such thing as a silly question, Vicky. I think it's also helpful just to reiterate that you'd sort of filtered those out, I think, Raffaele, so which is good. Okay. As I say, I'm taking these in order. Zaid asked a question which I answered in the chat, but again, just for completeness, you're happy to share the slides post-call? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Alison, okay, this is an interesting one. Have you found registrars or resellers who are willing to host transient abusive domains more than others? So are there some who are perhaps more guilty of this?
That's very interesting, but there is some data on the paper about this. The problem is that they hide mostly behind like legitimate parties. So you find like a lot of GoDaddy, a lot of Namecheap. It's really difficult to draw if there is some outlier in these patterns, because we don't know the real distribution. So we don't know the baseline distribution of DNS. We don't know the popularity of all the registrars around the world. And without that, I cannot say, this looks suspicious because this is more likely, because it looks suspicious if it's compared to the baseline of the registration as more transient domain. But again, if I look to the top 10, it all look like legitimate names. That means that these actors just exploit like legitimate infrastructure. And that may be also the reason why they get caught so fast. Because if you, I expect like a registrar like GoDaddy and like Namecheap to be pretty active in their fight against abuse.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, this is where thinking about some other research from other organisations, such as the sort of DNS Research Federation, for example. Those sort of registries or registrars that use know your customer processes fairly aggressively, you would expect those to have less of a problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, you don't obviously have to check that correlation. But whereas those that don't have such processes in place are more likely to be.
There is a paper of that of a colleague of mine, Giovanni Mura. He worked like he wrote a paper with people in Ireland, and in Ireland they have like a particular construct for domain name, for which you have like need to have, I think, a sort of established business in Ireland to get a .ie domain, or need to be an established person in Ireland to get a .ie domain, and they see far less abuse because of course they need to verify the identity of their customers. So KYC is definitely one of the solutions here to try to basically solve this problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think with the NIS2 legislation taking more effect, that will help in that regard. Okay, where are we? A quick series of questions from Zaid. So per the presented research, what is the average time it takes to remove a domain once an update takes place? And can this time window technically be optimized to, if not zero, close to zero? And if so, what are the blockers that might prevent that?
Okay, so
and if that's a complex, as I say, you can see it in the chat as well, if it helps, Raffaele, to see the question. It's the one from Zaid.
The answer there, so the blockers here, the problem of these domains here, of course, is that this domain stays in the cache of recursive resolver. Imagine you set this domain name with like a TTL for a record of 1 day. This domain will stay 1 day in the cache of a recursive resolver. And what will happen, or the maximum TTL of the recursive resolver, of course, that recursive resolver accepts. What will happen there is basically that a registry or a registrar can take action and remove this domain name. But if they don't notify to the world that this domain name was malicious and has been removed from the zone, how this resolver will know, and how this resolver can flush their caches to avoid that this domain name will still do harm. And that's the main problem. If we don't share this kind of information, we can do it. We did that with this mechanism of the paper. We are like 30 minutes late from the moment that we see the deletion of the domain name, because I gave like some buffer of time to be sure that indeed was deleted. But here there is like one entity that is very sure that this domain name has been deleted. Actually, two entities. One is the registry and the other is the registrar. They can share the information and in this coordinated manner, our suppose it should be. And this time then can be reduced to zero, because then all the recursive resolver of this word can subscribe to this block list, and at least we can avoid the problem of people leveraging cache.
Yeah, good point. And the point on the chat immediately after that from Alice, who's quite rightly reminding us that the fairly recently created global signal exchange could be an interesting mechanism to exchange this type of data, to at least circulate it to a wider group of interested parties, accepting, as you say, with things like the sort of cache and so on. It's a hard problem to solve perfectly. But if you've at least got people that are engaged in the subject, that will be a good start. Okay, question from Jim. I wonder if we could get a UUID for each customer in a registry when a registrant could use different registrars.
Yeah, does that make sense, Andrew? I'm not sure it makes sense. I think so.
It doesn't to me, but if it does to Raffaele, that's the important thing.
Yeah,
So-
I see the one of the difficulties if you register as a registrant with one registry under pick a top level domain UK or com, then you go through a different registrar to register a different domain. How are you going to get a unique ID for all the domains that Jim has registered, for instance? I don't. It's not a problem I have an answer to, but that would certainly help security researchers. Of course, once you've, I guess, defined what an identity is in the first place, based on an email address or something.
So I guess the answer there is there needs to be someone that is responsible to hold in this database that correlate all this information. And if you want to stop at the level of registry, that means, okay, I will allow people to correlate behavior of different registrants across different registrar for the same registry. Sounds complicated, but if you want to allow this, you can stop at the level of registry and say the registry will keep this database, keep this hashing function of this information that we want to hash stable and shared across all the registrar that belongs to that registry. Then you have a way to correlate information. But there needs to be an entity that decides, and all the entities that are below that entity that agrees to use the same hashing function are the same unique identifier database somehow. And then you share just unique identifier because that will be enough to perform this kind of correlation. In an ideal world, you will need to scale this up to the root and to ICANN probably, and say there's like a single entity that is responsible to store all the information related to the registration of the domain name, and that should be up to the root because then this information can be correlated across all the actor of the DNS ecosystem. But I think we should start from registry and then see if this can be scaled up at higher level.
Yeah, I think even that'll be difficult. The only sort of unique identifier I guess we've currently got is an email, but of course, a registrant could have multiple email addresses, particularly a malicious actor. But what you're really trying to do is increase the cost of doing criminal harm, I guess, with the old pyramid of pain principle. So, just a thought.
Yeah, email address is something that's really easy to fake. Payment information is a bit more challenging. That was the reason why I was calling for having a sort of hash of the payment.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Good thought. Thank you.
Yeah.
Right, I'll take these last two in the chat and then I'll come on to Zaid, who's patiently got his hand raised. So firstly, from Pat, is there a non-Docker version of the tools, zone stream, public feed, i.e. scripts and make files, etc.?
So the stream of data is just a public Kafka endpoint. So whatever kind of Kafka client that can talk to the Kafka endpoint and the schema registry can basically read the data. I just made get that Docker image from Confluent because that was like an easy way people can just run a single command and try it out. But any Kafka client works basically.
Great, thanks. And then finally in the chat from Alison, you mentioned DNS transparency, like certificate transparency. Do you think this would rise to the level of work at the ITF, for example? Apparently it was discussed for a bit in the certificate working group before that working group ended. So is there an opportunity for a standard here? I think is the question, Alison. I think you're driving it.
I think we need a standard. Definitely we need a standard because it's very challenging to agree on a common format on how this information should be shared, what should be the field of this information sharing, and why we need certain information compared to the other. Also the discussion of the unique identifier. So definitely we need the standard. The risk that I see in starting from the standard is that we need first to come to an agreement on what people will feel comfortable to share. before getting to the standard, because otherwise we get the standard, then we get thousands of optional fields, and
Yeah.
that would be not extremely helpful.
Yeah, fair point. Okay, thank you. Zaid, yeah, you've had your hand raised. Do you want to unmute?
Thank you, Andrew. Lowering my hand now. Yeah, thanks a lot, Raffaele, for the research. Ironically, I have been looking into the history of this product that you looked at that you demonstrated in the beginning, and been kind of digging into the archives, trying to figure out why it was, suspended and all that. Question to you is, based on the research that you did, how useful was it, and what were the gaps associated with it, looking at how things are now?
So I cannot really give you an answer to the question, because probably in 2004 I was 10. So it was many years ago. The serious answer is, it was the product was launched many years ago. I think there was a scientific paper out of this product, and it was extremely helpful to identify a spam campaign. There is something similar out there. There is something similar for example, for .sc.ch, that you can just do intermediate zone transfer and get to something that was really similar to whatever VeriSign was offering at that time. We also did a comparison with .nl, and we checked basically, okay, let's assume you operate like registry that published the zone to CZDS. They don't do that. Let's make this assumption. Let's say you publish the zone once a day, and let's look to these intra-day changes, and let's look to how much we miss if we take our approach compared to whatever you see. And we saw basically that we see just 30%. So there is still an untapped 60% of domains, short-lived domains, that we don't see, just based on that. The other advantage here is that all this system is basically continuously doing the measurement to try to catch up on the signal that something has changed inside the DNS ecosystem. And I'm measuring like every 10 minutes a new registered domain name for the next 48 hours of their registration. And the main problem there is that I will be like always at latest 10 minutes late. You can do something quicker. You can do something as soon as the domain name has been registered. You can track every little movement of the domain name, every changes, every IP address, if you would have like a service like the Rapid Zone Update that VeriSign was providing. And if you do that, you may be able to scout domain names that are performing abuse even before they do abuse. So even before they are like proactively reaching to end users and performing their spam campaign or their phishing campaign.
Thank you very much. That's helpful. Thanks.
Great, thanks. I have to say there was a fantastic transcript error there, which talked about VeriSignus as opposed to VeriSign, which was made me smile just whilst you answer that question, which is quite funny. Brilliant. Well, I'm conscious of the time. I think we've covered all of the questions that have been asked. I think, as I found it, hopefully from the questions, Raffaele, it's clear that this is definitely a topic of interest, which feels like it needs to be explored further. Whether it leads to a standard, as you say, there's a challenge because it requires people to honestly provide the information. But if this starts a conversation, at least it's made people more aware that there's a problem. Because I know from some of your research, I think you were suggesting that for a newly registered domain for phishing, it can be exploited within an hour and abandoned within about 6 hours, long before it's on the radar of anyone to add to a threat feed, for example. So this is an important topic which definitely needs to be looked at in more depth, but at least with this research, it's bringing it to people's attention. as to understand why it's important and that it is something that needs to be done. So thank you for taking the time to do that, and I'm sure there will be questions following as people had a chance to digest an awful lot of research that you summarised in maybe 25-30 minutes. So thank you for giving us the high level summary of a lot of very hard work. Right, okay, I'll just quickly wrap up the call because of course we've got 5 minutes left. So let me just briefly return to sharing my slides for a moment. Which I should now be doing. Okay, I'm not going to go through all these in detail. A few things came out from the weekly headlines this week. Any of you that don't get my weekly headlines email that wish to be added to the mailing list, just ping me a message afterwards. I'll happily do that. But I'll highlight, without going into any detail, there's an interesting story from Infoblox about they looked further into some malware that's providing phishing as a service, just building on the last presentation about how quickly domains are exploited for phishing. It's quite sophisticated. It's a phishing as a service platform. It uses the DNS MX records and also uses DO to bypass a lot of DNS content filtering tools. Yeah, well worth a look at that. A really interesting piece of research from Infoblox. And also, again, this is following on very nicely. I hadn't realised at the time from the presentation. The UK National Cybersecurity Centre has published some best practice guidelines for registrars to help protect against DNS abuse. I think they published that late last week. As I say, there's a lot of other material which we won't have time to talk about, so I'll share the slides afterwards, but if you get my weekly headlines email on a Monday morning, you will have had these in any case. So worth a look, some interesting stuff, and then a whole bunch of other less relevant to the DNS, but other things that caught my eye over the last week for again, for you to look at your leisure. I will highlight in terms of some impending deadlines, amongst other things, the sort of second call from presentations for RIPE 90 is coming up early next week, the 8th of April. They had a sort of round which closed a month or so ago. This is the sort of second call for presentations. And although I didn't have time to add it to this earlier today, there was a call for input from one of the co-chairs of the RIPE DNS working group. So they're also looking for material to include in the DNS working group session, which is usually on a Wednesday morning at RIPE. And then at the bottom of the screen there, the sort of Colombian government has got a call for tenders to run the .co registry, which closes early May, 6th of May. So it's a call out at the moment. In terms of upcoming events, there's a sort of few things. So for tomorrow, for example, Echo's top DNS best practice series covers navigating Web3 domains. Various other things, and a couple I put in bold because I'm going to them. If you happen to be in San Francisco at the end of this month, the RSA conference, I'll be there, so it'd be good to meet in person. And similarly, I mentioned it already, RIPE 90 coming up in the middle of May in Lisbon. So again, if you're there, it'd be good to meet up there. And I think that's it, other than just a reminder this time next week, the main topic of conversation will be an update on DELEG, which is a reasonably hot topic in the ITF at the moment. This is about sort of delegations within the DNS, and we have, I think, 2 or 3 of the co-authors of one of the proposals around DELEG will be on the call to give an update on the current state of affairs on that. Various other things over the coming couple of months as well. But let me pause there as we're exactly on the hour. I'll say thank you for my to sponsors, long-term sponsors of the call, DNS OARC, for providing that sponsorship. Thank you, obviously, to Raffaele for the presentation, and I'm sure there'll be some follow-up from that, so that's very much appreciated. And thank you also to Simon for coming on at very short notice to share the sort of sad news about one of our former colleagues, Nigel Hicks. Again, much appreciated for being able to jump in and do that. But anyway, I hope that was useful to everyone. Have a fantastic week, and look forward to catching up this time next week to talk about all things DELEG. So speak to you all then. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Could I just clarify
Thanks,
the
Andrew.
name, please? I'm Hicks. He's Hickson.
Oh, did I say, if I said Hickson, my apologies, Simon.
No, it's Nigel Hickson. I'm Hicks. So he's the guy we're talking about. Thanks, him.
Okay. Thanks, Simon. Bye, everyone.
Hi, thanks.